Welcome to Therapy in the Great Outdoors, the podcast where we explore the business and practice of nature-based pediatric therapy of all kinds. If you're an outdoor-loving pediatric practitioner in the fields of occupational, physical, or speech therapy, social work, or mental health, this podcast will help you start and grow a successful nature-based practice or program. I am the ever honest, always 100% real, you'll hear it all on this podcast, Dr. Laura Park Figueroa. I'm a pediatric OT with over 20 years of experience, and I run a thriving nature-based practice with profitable locations in 2 different states and multi-six figures in revenue. I also host the free online community at therapyinthegreatoutdoors.com to help you pursue your nature-based therapy dreams too. Are you ready to take action on those dreams? Let's jump in. Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 100 of Therapy in the Great Outdoors. Technically, I've done 175 episodes because I had a podcast called Mind Your OT Business, which is still live if you want business tips and advice for running a therapy practice. And so I've done 175 episodes, but I'm going to do this special celebration episode, which is a listener Q&A where you can ask me anything. I got questions from all of you on Instagram and in the Therapy in the Great Outdoors community, and also from my email list, and asked all of you to send in questions. And I have a lot of questions. This might actually end up being 2 episodes. I try to keep these episodes to about 30 minutes or less. So we'll see how wordy I get when I answer these questions. So I got a good mix of business and therapy questions. So I hope that this will be a very, very useful episode for you in your own work. All right, let's dive into the first one. So, before I get started, I want to caveat that some of these were questions that were posed online on Instagram in a little question box. So there wasn't a lot of room. And so they might sound really general, and something that I think about a lot. I used to teach in an OT program, and so I think that the quality of the question you ask will dictate the quality of the answer that you get back. So if you ask a really pointed, very specific question, you'll get a very pointed, specific answer back. Some of these questions that I got are much more general. Like I could write a novel on, it could be 20 podcast episodes to fully answer the question. So I'm going to try to stay high level and give a few quick tips for each one, and then hopefully direct you all to other resources I may have or other places to get more information to more fully answer the questions. So the first question, Kelly sent me 2 questions on Instagram, and the first one was about how to start or run a nature-based camp. So this is one of those questions that she submitted on Instagram, so she probably had limited space in the little question box, but it is a very general question, and it's hard for me to know how to answer it, not having more contextual information about maybe where Kelly is at in her nature-based therapy process. Like, I don't know if she's already running a business and any of that. So I don't have a lot of details here in order to answer this question really well. What I want to start with saying is that one of my goals this year is to get a Tigo shop set up where you all can buy my ebooks and templates and other things that I use in my business. And I'm hoping to also offer a space for anyone else who has created things that are relevant for nature-based therapists to offer a space for you all to sell your digital products that you've created as well. This is a big project. I'm going to start with getting just a few things there, but because you asked this question, Kelly, I am going to likely work on getting my camp kit book that I wrote years ago and that I have sold in the past. It's not currently for sale. I'm going to work on getting that up, edited, and up and for sale in the shop, because I do think this is a question that a lot of people have. And that book is, I think, like 40 pages long or something of information that you could read about this topic, because I am probably not going to do this question justice here, trying to keep the podcast episode really short. So the things I do have top of mind, though, the first thing is to start way earlier than you think. I cannot tell you how many times I have gotten on a coaching call with a client who is running a nature-based practice. And that person is maybe talking to me in early May or maybe late April, and they're asking me questions about how to run summer camp in like 2 months. And I always have to regret to inform them that it probably is too late to try to do summer camp in that short of a timeline. Start way earlier than you think. I would recommend 9 months ahead of time, at a minimum 6 months ahead of time. The first thing that you need to do is secure a location to offer camp and secure staff so that you know you're going to have enough people to run camp. After that, you need to decide the format that you want to use. Do you want your camp to be a therapy service, or do you want to run an enrichment camp where you might be a therapy professional, but you are running the camp as an enrichment service and you're not going to be offering therapy as part of that camp? You need to decide times and days and how many weeks of camp you want to offer. What age of kids do you want to serve? What is the focus of your services? If you are going to be doing therapy, are you directing your services towards a particular goal area or a particular diagnosis of children? All of these things have to be decided way in advance because you need adequate time to be able to plan camp, yes, but also to market to local families so that people know the camp is out there to enroll in. Camps usually start being advertised in at least in the two places that I have run nature-based practices here in Madison, Wisconsin, as well as in the Bay Area of California. People start to enroll their children in camp in January and February. And so if you are not up and ready to go with a enrollment system and a way for people to pay for camp in February, you've kind of missed the boat as a practice in order to get people to commit to a week of camp or to the days that you are offering, because people are working on their summer camp schedules really early in order to know that they have spots for their kids to go to camp during the summer. So for that reason, you need to get those enrollment and payment systems and the format and the location and all of that done way before you want to offer the actual camp. And then once you have kids enrolled, you have to plan what you are going to do during camp. And so that's what I share in the camp kit that I used to sell and the book that I will revise and put in the shop. I share kind of how my practice structures a day of camp and just a lot of advice for different activities and ways to structure things for your camp. So that is totally up to you. I mean, you can structure camp however you would want to. We use the Contigo approach that I developed, and so we kind of frame our camp around that framework in order to deliver services during camp. In my practice, we run everything as therapy. We do not do enrichment services. That's just how I've chosen to structure my practice. And I know that there are other therapists who have chosen to go the other route and just do enrichment. So we're a combination of both. If you do both, it is very challenging to market, and you have to make sure that when you're marketing, it's very clear to families which is therapy and which is enrichment and what is the difference between the two. So your staffing ratios might be different. The level of support that you give children might be different. The setting might be different. The number of kids that you serve might be different. There's lots of things to consider there. So just make sure you're being really clear with families if you choose to offer both, because it can get confusing. Okay, I hope that gave you some ideas, Kelly, and everyone else listening. And I'm going to move on to the next question, which was Kelly's question as well. What do nature-based evaluations look like for group and individual? So once again, this is something else that I'm going to put in the shop because I have a individual OT nature-based assessment template that we use in my practice that I share with my business coaching program. And I'm going to put that in the shop for sale once we get the shop up and running. But let's start with individual, since I just mentioned that. So our individual assessment process is very similar to how it would be in a outpatient pediatric clinic-based setting. The challenge is that in the outdoor environment, because our assessments do take place outside at the parks where we provide our services. And so the challenge is that you cannot standardize some of the things that you may do for a motor assessment. So we actually have moved kind of away from doing more motor assessments and more towards doing social emotional assessments in my practice, because that's the type of kids that we are now getting referred. The concerns of the family are more social emotional concerns. So our assessment process has changed slightly. So we have a lot of different questions on our assessment. In my practice, we are focusing on the family's needs, right? I run a cash pay practice, so I need to say that. I can do that. I'm allowed to because I'm not operating under an insurance-based model. So this might be different for you if you run under an insurance-based model. But we're focusing on the family's priorities for treatment. And we are writing for individual kids, we may write 2 or maybe 3 goals, but we really try to focus in and focus specifically on 1 or 2 goals, because when you try to do too much, you're really doing nothing in treatment sessions. So really getting specific about the goals. And then the only difference that we may have in our assessment is that there is a section that we call observation of motor skills in nature setting. So it's just where the therapist does a brief narrative of what they observed in the nature setting. And then we go into the results of assessments very similar to how we would in any other setting. We have some templated stuff there for the typical assessments that we do. So for individual services, the ones we have listed here are the Brown Executive Function and Assessment Scales, the Devereaux Student Strengths Assessment. It's DESSA for short, DESSA. And then we also have the sensory processing measure here, and then a nature connection section for doing a nature connection assessment. So that is it for our individuals. Now, it's a little bit different for group therapy because I used to, when I first started the practice, I would personally drive to individually visit and do an individual assessment for every kid that was applying to be in a group. And it quickly becomes unsustainable for you to physically go to assess a child when you are enrolling them in a group service in your practice. So in my practice, we now have a system that we do a strengths and challenges checklist. So this is a non-standardized checklist that we developed in my practice. I developed it with my team using survey design methods that I learned in my PhD program. So good thing the PhD was worth something, because sometimes I'm like, why did I even do that? Anyway, so yeah, we developed this checklist, and it is 20 items in social emotional skills and 20 items in sensory motor. So those 2 categories kind of allow us to look at the child's strengths, like where are this child's strengths and where are this child's weaknesses. And we try to have a good mix of those in groups so that we don't overload a group with one kind of need of the kids in the group. So that is a tool that has been very useful. It's a tool I might offer that in the shop as well. Now that I'm thinking about it, I have it in the nature-based therapy certification program that I offer. Anyways, that tool is very helpful. And then we also do a sensory processing measure for each kid before they come into a group. We do not see the child in person before the first day of group. And all of the waivers and the enrollment process that families go through when they apply to be in a group is very clear that this is a process that sometimes groups need to shift a little bit once we meet the children. Very rarely, but occasionally we do need to move a child to individual or move a child to a different group. And so we solve those unique situations when they come up. So that is what we do for group. Now, you can do whatever you want for group. I would just highly recommend that you have some way of getting some information about the children in order to form the group. We actually use the term apply for group because we intentionally form the group based on the applications that are received. So, okay, I have gone on and on about that one. We're probably already at 20 minutes, and that's the first question, aren't we? Let me do a time check here. 14 minutes, not too bad. Okay, not as bad as I thought. All right, let's see. The next question came from @_Kupala. I don't know if that's how you say it, on Instagram. Are there rules or regulations around where you can provide services? Looking to start a nature-based play group? Yes, you need to check wherever you want to provide services and call and find out if you need a permit to use the location. Lots of times you don't, sometimes you do. That's like, it just kind of depends on the area. And each park or location will have its own rules and regulations around where you can provide services. So you'll just need to look at your local place and do some research there. That was a good short answer. Okay. This is a longer list of questions here. These are from Sydney, and she said, "Hi, Laura. I've been listening since 2021. I've listened to just about every episode of the Mind Your OT Business podcast, which is my other podcast, because I've always known I wanted to start my own business someday. I currently have little kids, a full-time school-based job, and I'm in the process of moving to 20 acres. Oh my gosh, what a dream, which I hope to run my business on in the very near future. I have a few getting started questions as I venture into putting myself out there. First, how do you decide which website hosting platform is best for you? Do you need a website hosting platform? What are some key features to look for in a hosting platform? I want to start simple but have room for growth in the future. Do you go big right away and pay for features you might not use for a while, or wait, keep it simple to start, or upgrade down the road? I've done some Google searches and they aren't therapy based. They seem to be for selling products, or they advertise the look of the templates as important. I'm pretty tech savvy and can figure things out easily. I've already created a vision of my website on Google Sites, but I'm afraid it won't be enough for the future features I may need." Okay, Sydney, I think you're overthinking this, okay? Squarespace or Wix are both like easy website platforms to use, and the majority of nature-based practice owners that I know use Squarespace or Wix. So I think this is a really simple question. I've used Squarespace. Well, at first I built my own website on Weebly, which I don't even know if Weebly still exists, but I had like a very simple website that had like one photo and some information on it when I first got started, but that was 10 years ago. After a year in practice, I paid way too much money, you guys, way too much. I paid $10,000 for someone to create my website for me. Worst money I ever spent. I knew the people and I felt like I needed to hire the best. And, they were not people who were going to give me a deal. It was just not, I don't know. They created my branding and my first website, and I feel like it was just way too much money that early in my business to spend on a logo and a website. However, I'm also speaking from right now, and back then we did not have Canva, which is a do-it-yourself design platform, and we did not have Squarespace and Wix, which were like now are true do-it-yourself. They have templates that look beautiful, but back then you needed a little bit more design expertise and ability to code and stuff to try to like get things to look exactly how you wanted. So, Sydney, do not think about this anymore. Just use Squarespace or Wix, compare both of them, pick which one you want and move forward, because that's all you're ever going to need. And if you want to design it yourself to start and then get a designer down the road to make it look prettier, or do a new logo for you or whatever, you can, but you do not need a pretty website to get started. I do think that you can just use Squarespace or Wix and be fine forever and ever. So that's another easy question to answer. All right. Number 2, she said, "I want my business to stay small until my kids are older, but also remain profitable enough to cover costs of operation. Is this possible? What can I do to stay organized enough to ensure this?" So this is a fabulous question, Sydney. This is a question that I love because you're starting with the end in mind. You're like thinking about what you actually want the business to look like once it's up and going. And the challenge may be that staying small, quote unquote, is kind of hard when you start a business and put yourself out there, because good news travels fast. And if you're providing a really good service, there are naturally going to be word of mouth, more people coming to you. And so the thing I would say to answer this question is, what does it mean to remain profitable enough to cover costs of operation? Because I want you to be profitable enough to pay yourself well and cover costs of operation. Because covering costs of operation is basically just breaking even, and why work then? You're not making any money. So I want you, maybe that's what you meant. Maybe you meant like paying yourself a salary and covering the costs. The way to do this is to start with the end in mind, like you're going down that line of thinking already. And the way to do this is to look at what number of money do you want to be making, okay? So if you need to make, like you said, you're working full-time in a school-based job right now, and if you want to transition to running your own business, how much are you willing to give up of your full-time school-based job, or do you want to make your full-time school-based job salary? Let's say you're making 120 grand a year, which I don't think any school-based therapist is, just for easy math, okay? So 10 grand a month. And if you want to make 10 grand a month, how many kids do you need to see in your business in order to make 10 grand a month? So you're just going to do the math and figure out how many kids do you need to see in order to make what you want to make and cover the cost of running your business. Your costs to run your business are going to be very, very low when you first get started. You need a few simple supplies, you need an EMR, you need a website, and that's about it. So you really don't need that much to get started. That is one of the beautiful things about nature-based practice. We really just don't need that much stuff to get started. You might need to buy some assessment tools. That can be a good chunk of change, but in general, it's pretty simple, and I think it's something that is really easy to get started if you start with the end in mind and have those numbers in place for how many kids you want to see, and then aim for that number. At the same time, I would encourage you to think about not limiting yourself to keeping the business small until your kids are older, but think about keeping your work hours in the business small until your kids are older, and hiring people to work with you in the business in order to work part-time, but allow your business to be generating income for you as well when you are not working. So I would never in a bazillion, gajillion, trillion, bazillion years say, that's a new number for you all. I would never say that running a practice is passive income, quote unquote, but there is a real reward that you get for being the one to take on the risk of running a business. And that is that when people work for you, a portion of that money that they make in your business does go to you as the business owner. Not a ton. You're not trying to be greedy. It is your reward for taking the risk to start the business. And at least in America, we live in a capitalistic country. So if someone wants to go out and take the risk of starting their own business, they have the right to do that. Okay. So this is a little bee in my bonnet, as people used to say, because I feel like there is a lot of hatred towards like corporations and hatred towards CEOs in our society or whatever. And I think a lot of times we just don't understand economics. I'm actually going to do a future episode on this. I was maybe going to get to that question in this episode, but already it's so long, I know I'm not going to. But there was another question that was sent to me that I'll answer in a future episode, and we'll talk a little bit about economics. But basically, like, starting a business and running a business is a way for you to enrich the lives of a lot of people. And it's not just you trying to like line your pockets with money, right? So I think too often we vilify big business owners, right? But we forget the actual contributions that big business owners have made to our society and giving people jobs and livelihoods and helping the economy in that way. So that's a whole other rabbit hole I could go into, but I want you to think about, is it possible that you could actually have a team of people and be working part-time even while your kids are young, maybe, and make your business really successful and really profitable with a team, not just you. Every nature-based practice owner reaches a point where they can't see any more kids, and you're limited. If you're never going to hire, you're going to be very limited on the income that you can make. So I would encourage you to think about hiring. I know that would be a long way down the road right now as you're thinking about just getting started questions, but just to get your wheels turning in the right direction, I wanted to share that little thought I had too about like, you don't have to work full time when you run a nature-based practice. You can work part-time and have a team, and other people can be working full-time or part-time as well. So, all righty. Okay, I'm going to do two more questions, and then I'm going to save the last one that I said about economics and stuff. I'm going to save that for another episode because it's long and it's really involved, and I have a lot of thoughts about it. So that'll be in a few weeks. Okay, Julie asked the next question. She said, I'm in Alberta, Canada, and our winters last about 5 months with some days, weeks reaching -30 or colder. How do I run a successful nature-based practice in these conditions? Well, you plan your yearly schedule around when you think there will be really, really cold times. And it is helpful in climates like yours to have an indoor location for days when you can't safely be outside for an extended period of time. So I know some practice owners have negotiated rents or leases with churches to just use their facility for, one afternoon a week. It could be on an if needed basis, something like that. And so you have to find a local place to be indoors when you have that really, really cold weather. You also could plan your calendar around that, right? So you could just say, whatever the coldest months are, if it's January, February, you could say January, February, we don't offer services. And that's when we shut down for admin planning, other things that need to be done in the business. You could do, if you wanted to, you could do telehealth during those times and meet online. If it's -30, I think people would want to be inside maybe. There's lots of ways to kind of work out. Like you can still do nature-based therapy when you're in an indoor setting, right? It's a framework or a mindset that you have about integrating nature into your practice. So you can creatively take natural elements and bring them into an indoor setting and still be offering really good therapy services for kids. So it just kind of depends on what you want to do and what your weather policy is in your business, what you've set up as being the cancellation number for the weather. In my practice, we're in Fahrenheit. So we do, if it's 20 degrees or below with wind chill, we do not hold group. I originally had it 15, but I thought that was a little extreme. So, because it's really cold outside for 90 minutes when it's below 20 with wind chill. So, yeah, that is what my policy is, but you make up yours. And some climates, like maybe in Alaska, people are more hardy and they would be out there until it was 0 degrees Fahrenheit. I don't know. But you get to make up what you want to do for your own practice. So those are some ideas I have for that one, Julie. Okay, and then the last question for this episode is from JJ. One question I have now is, do you have the parent or guardian sign any type of waiver when working in the outdoors? Do you typically need to get the city's approval to do therapy in the park? I heard from someone in my local area who is currently planning to do nature-based therapy, but at their own private location, and she mentioned it was too difficult to go to a public park. Okay, so interesting. This is an interesting question. So I kind of answered that when it was like, do you need approval to work in the parks? Like, yes, you obviously do. And I would say typically, yes, you do need to get the approval of whoever the manager of the park is. So some are managed by a city, some are managed by a state. Like you definitely need to get approval to be there on a weekly basis. And let me start at the beginning. Yes, we have parents sign waivers, participation waivers, liability waivers, all the things. Those might be something else to offer in the shop as well. I realize you guys need a lot of these like little things that are hard to kind of generate yourself. And so I typically have those in my business coaching program, which I'm not running anymore. So I am likely going to put a lot of these in the shop for you all to access if you want to buy them. They're not going to be like ridiculously expensive or anything, but I just feel like a lot of people need these things when they're getting started. So, and it can save you a lot of time. So yes, have the parents sign a waiver for certain. You need to do that. Now back to getting the city's approval. So yes, you need approval. As far as hearing from someone who is using their own private location and mentioning that it was too difficult to go to a public park, I could see the perception there, like that it's easier to use a private location. I definitely would prefer a private location. If I had my own space, that would be preferable because of privacy kind of, and maybe you could set up things and not have to take them down and all of that. But I have not found it too difficult to go to public parks at all. Like it's been very easy to find places, fairly easy to do permitting. And there's one park in California that's a little bit tricky because it's very popular and overly used. But in general, I think either way can work. Private location or public parks can work. Just make sure that you get the approval when you're working in a public space. The other thing I would say too is that you need to make sure to add the private property owner or the public park to your liability insurance. So they need to be added as an additional insured on your liability insurance so that they are covered. Sometimes that's a requirement of the permitting process, but in general, it's just good to do that in order to protect them too if anything should happen. I've never had any situation in my practice happen that required going through liability insurance, but you never know, and it's something you should definitely have in place as a practice owner. All right. So I am going to save the last question that I have here, where I want to talk a little bit more about business and economics, and a question that I got on the anonymous Tigo survey. This was not a question in relation to my asking for questions for this episode, but I did an end of year Therapy in the Great Outdoors community survey. Almost 40 of you filled it out. So thank you if you took time to do that. And I got a question that I want to share on the podcast because I'll talk a little bit more about understanding economics and business and how our mindset can really affect the way we go about getting started as nature-based practitioners. So that's it for this episode, you all. I just want to say thank you so much for being a listener. If you have been listening or if you've gotten any value from this podcast in the past or in this episode, please will you leave a review? So this podcast, it's hard because my old podcast had, I think at this point it has almost 200,000 downloads. And it's a more general topic, right? It's just about business for OTs. This podcast, because it is such a very specific market, right? Like pediatric therapists who are interested in nature and working outdoors with kids. It has been slower to grow than my old podcast. So one way that you can really help is to leave a review for the podcast wherever you listen. So if you can do that for me in celebration of this 100th episode, I would be oh so grateful, because that really helps the podcast get seen by more people on the podcast player apps. And as always, I am very thankful for you all for listening and tuning in and being in my orbit. So that's it. Until next time, get outside, connect, reflect, and enjoy therapy in the great outdoors. Bye.